call David Clendon.
And I'd like to begin my comments by complimenting our colleague Mr Davis on the work he's done on this issue to date and on bringing this debate to the House today, because it's a matter that needs to be debated. It needs the light of day shone on it so that people do actually get a better view of what's actually happening in our prisons on a day-to-day basis. So, the President of the Corrections Association, Bevan Hanlon, is on record as saying that the events in Serco Prison and Mardeaton Prison around fighting and drug use and so on were known to the authorities at least 18 months ago. I quote Mr Hanlon, "I can tell you now that on July 9th, 2014, the Chief Executive, the National Commissioner and the Northern Regional Commissioner all received that report." We have heard from the Minister this afternoon that the response, rather the lack of response to that report, was because these matters were unsubstantiated. That is not a compelling or a reassuring response. With all the resources available to both Corrections and Serco, why were these matters not substantiated or put to rest? Why did it take the emergence of an illegal video to bring this matter to light, to bring it to this debate today? It is remarkable that we are hearing accusations that stories emerging from within the prisons are being made up. I also, like Mr Davis, have had contact in the last few days from people working within the sector with very similar tales. So if they are indeed being made up, then it's a very widespread conspiracy. The unfortunate fact is that these people are frightened to come publicly and put their names to these events, to describe events happening in our prisons, because they fear for their jobs. That's a very unhappy situation. It reflects a very unhealthy culture within our prisons, and I would suggest a select committee inquiry would be the appropriate place where these people can come forward with some safety and make statements about what they have observed and what they believe to be happening so that we can deal with it at that level. So there's some irony in the fact that the appalling events that have been occurring at Serco have come to light via modern technology through video taken by cell phones and presumably the phone or the SIM card smuggled out. I say ironic because Serco tells us that it is in fact technology that enables them to run a very different staffing model in their prisons compared with the public sector prisons, with the corrections run institutions, and particularly in terms of the staff-inmate ratio. Earlier this year we heard directly from Serco's Asia-Pacific Operations Manager, one Scott McNairn. He confirmed that each unit at the New Wirri prison will contain 60 inmates. This is including the high security unit. Each unit will have 60 inmates and 2 officers. And even my arithmetic enables me to say that's a ratio of 1 to 30, even for the high security wing. In the public prisons, that ratio is 1 to 15, double the number of prison officers. Low security in the public sector, 1 to 20, so still 50% more officers on deck watching those inmates and low security than in the Serco high security. And I suspect that points to a lot of the underlying problem, that why these events have occurred, because we simply don't have the people on the ground. We don't have the trained, resourced prison officers in the wings observing what's going on, being the eyes and ears of management, building relationships with the inmates, making those prisons as safe as they can be. And the reason why the private operators run a lower staff-inmate ratio is all about profit. Most of the costs of running a prison are embedded cost. About the only wiggle room you've got to try and generate profit out of running a prison is through staffing. And this is, I believe that what we're seeing happening in Serco managed facilities is a direct response of them cutting corners on staff. And this isn't the first couple of years. Imagine 5-10 years down the track of their 25-year contract. We are going to see some very serious and unhelpful and positively dangerous outcomes, because we've got the situation where a private company is trying to drive a commercial profit out of operating a prison, and that's simply not acceptable. So I'd like to comment on the investigation, the terms of review. I'm slightly puzzled, the terms of reference, I'm sorry. I'm puzzled by the Minister's insistence earlier today that this is actually a review, it is not an investigation, because I quote, the terms of reference for the investigation of the circumstances surrounding organised prisoner-on-prisoner fighting, (Fight Club), access to cell phones, etc. at Mount Eden Correction Facility. Is this a review or is it an investigation? And I sincerely hope it is the latter. A review, to me, indicates you have a once-over lightly, a quick look at what went on. This needs to be an in-depth review to get right to the bottom of what has been going on, what continues to occur on a daily basis, and to ensure that we're putting in place mechanisms to ensure that we don't see this sort of activity going on in our prisons. My challenge to the Minister would be that this investigation should be led. The primary investigating agency should be the Office of the Ombudsman. I would argue that the Corrections Department, and most certainly Serco's whatever investigative mechanism they have, is hopelessly compromised in this matter. It should be the Ombudsman as the lead agency. They have the investigative power, they have the authority, they have the confidence of this Parliament to be objective, to be disinterested, and that is where the responsibility should sit. They have experienced people within the Ombudsman's office who understand how our prisons operate, a lot of experience there. The corrections investigation, by default, must be hopelessly compromised, given that they have sat on this information for at least a year and arguably for 18 months. How can the public have any confidence? You can take it as a given that there will be a significant response, that anything corrections produces, rightly or wrongly, will be simply written off as a whitewash. There is too much self-interest for corrections, too much egg on face, too much potential political embarrassment for them, and commercial risk for Serco to allow that form of investigation to take place. I'd also like to reflect on the issue that Mr Davis raised earlier. I quote again from the terms of reference. The investigation will pay particular attention to the last 3-month period to determine a number of matters. The last 3-month period is not actually where the problem lay necessarily. It doesn't, the particular attention phrase does not say that there won't be a longer time horizon for the investigation, but why would you focus on the last 3 months of the period? And I hope it's not, because at that time the Mount Eden facility actually did have rather higher staff count than they would normally run with, because they had officers in training or officers who had completed their training but had not yet been transferred to the Wiri facility until it had opened. Isn't it interesting that the attempt to narrow the investigation in terms of time would overlap the period when that Serco facility did have significant staff numbers on the deck, on the ground, observing prison behaviour and actually seeing what's going on there. I'm also seriously concerned about the matter of the health services. Part of the terms of reference is to get information from the health service within the prison, and I also have heard entirely credible people telling me that the practice have been to export the walk-in wounded out of Mount Eden off to other prisons. The most extreme example we heard from Mr Davis about a resultant death that may well have come through as a result of one of these fight clubs. But there has been a compelling and a credible series of comments from people who say that people injured in these fights, and they must be reasonably serious injuries. You've got large, fit men going at each other with some enthusiasm. There must at least be cuts, bruises, injuries, visible injuries. Why is it not unusual, to say the least, that people are arriving in other prisons with evidence of having been in fights and nothing has been reported about this? One would hope that the health service, which unfortunately is also delivered by corrections, and in our view health services in prison should be delivered by a standalone health agency, not concerned or allied with corrections. We think it's to be hoped that those health incident reports will help to reveal what is or is not going on here. There is no question that violence has been underreported at this prison, unless there's this massive conspiracy of inmates, prison officers, management, NGOs working within the prisons. So this investigation should be comprehensive, and it should be led by the Ombudsman's office. Thank you.
Are there any